can tell you after doing this for 10 years, I'm going to literally outpace you financially by 20 or 30% because my residents tend to be loyal. I really want the company culture to be a culture that we really truly believe in the triple bottom line, that doing good and doing well are synonymous. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I can show you again and again that treating residents well, I have a 30% higher resident retention almost in every market that I'm in versus my competitors.
Today on the show, I have the pleasure of speaking with JP Newman. Now, JP is the founder, CEO, and managing principal of Thrive FP, where he leads and oversees the firm's growth, strategic direction, and the real estate transactions as a member of the investment committee. Now, JP has worked to create a company that reflects the principles and values of conscious capitalism, which is what we're going to talk about later in the show. And in 2019, he co-founded the nonprofit Veritas Impact Partners to provide health, education, and financial services for workforce housing residents living in his apartments. The mission is to create connected communities and to lighten the load of these cost-burdened residents while maintaining solid profits for his investors. JP is also a licensed real estate broker and a certified commercial investment member. So without further ado, I'm really pumped and excited to get him on the show, but let's get him out here. G'day, JP. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today, mate?
Good, Reed. Thank you so much. What a lovely opening. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Try my best, my friend. But you are dialing in from Austin, Texas, right? I've been to your awesome office, but you're originally from California, right?
I'm born and raised in Los Angeles and actually started out in the film industry. I worked for Sony Pictures. I was the head of family entertainment for many years. And right when I was getting married and realized that Sony Pictures was going to be a good corporate job, but never an entrepreneurial outlet for me, my wife looked at me one day pregnant on the San Diego freeway in Santa Monica, screaming in traffic and says, "Get me out of this place." And that was the beginning of the end of Los Angeles and the I can say now, looking back, a very lucky transition into Austin, Texas.
That's awesome. Well, I want to get into that story, but before we do, let's rewind the clock and tell the listeners how you made your first ever dollar as a kid.
Well, you're going to laugh at the story, but it also is going to age me a little bit. But I was lucky. I did have a very entrepreneurial father who really encouraged me at a young age to learn about business. And so at 8 years old, at the time, it was the first time that the electronic calculators had come out, and they were really selling for a premium. My dad had a way through a store one day. They had a sale where I could buy them and make a $5 margin on each one, and he bought 50 of them. So I now had 50 of these calculators stuck underneath my bed at a $5 premium. An 8-year-old had a chance to make $250, and I was pretty excited about that. So literally, I was dressed up door to door in a suit, and I would go to offices. Can you imagine an 8-year-old in a suit selling these calculators? And I did manage to sell all 50 of them. I put up signs. I went to the supermarkets. I did everything, and it was a great lesson to earn. It felt so good that an 8-year-old could be empowered enough to earn $250. That joy, I call it the Ferris Bueller moment, where you're like, oh my God, I can do anything. And to this day, I have to tell you, I get a lot of joy. Like if I'm on a ski slope and one of my deals closes and I know money was deposited to my bank, I call that my best Ferris Bueller day. And I think it really started as an 8-year-old kid.
That's awesome. Yeah. What type of calculator do you remember?
It was a no-name. It was a import. It was an Asian knockoff. So yeah, it was nothing big. It did nothing. It just basically was a calculator. But at the time, they were still considered sacred. You couldn't just jump on your phone and do those numbers. It was still considered like a valuable commodity at the time.
I remember getting my first scientific calculator for high school. Texas Instruments was the brand.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
And that was, the bigger one that's probably the size of your palm, and it had, the functions and the graphing and all that sort of stuff. I got a reconditioned one for probably $110 back in 2002. So anyway, it's probably dating me a little bit as well. But let's now walk through the story, because you've started this company Thrive, but you mentioned just before you were in the film industry. So, and your wife was sick of LA. So how did that all come about?
Yeah. So, I actually started out my career, and I think this is interesting, having a 17-year-old son who's applying for colleges. I really realized how much pressure we put on our kids to figure out, where do you want to be at such a young age? And I can see my kid going through that. And so I just thought I was going to be a lawyer because that's what my dad told me I was going to be. And so I went to UCLA pre-law, and I realized very quickly as I was studying to go to law school that had no energy or no passion. Something in me, thank God, more entrepreneurial, just said that's not your destiny, even though your dad told you that was your destiny. And I got in the toy business of all things. I tried a bunch of things. I probably had 26 jobs between 20 and 25. I think I parked cars. I did everything. I worked in telesales. I just did everything to figure it out. And finally, I kind of landed at a toy company, and that got me into like literally people would pitch me ideas for new toys. And I just thought it was so cool that I could like go work for a toy company, have people, pitching me toys. And ultimately that led to, you really had to understand the film industry because a lot of the toys would be based on the Power Rangers or Jurassic Park or all the Disney films. So I really they constantly kept me to, Hollywood premieres are coming even a year early to understand what films were coming out that could have toy properties to them. And I can tell you, it was one of the funnest jobs you can ever imagine. It really was fantastic. And that led me actually, that experience of toys and merchandising and licensing that was really interesting. Sony was looking for a person to lead family entertainment for them as a vice president. And I really was not, if anything, if you looked at me on paper, I was not the right candidate. I had no film experience, no production experience. But the truth was what they wanted, and they wanted someone that could like contain themselves and didn't need a lot of hand holding. Because the truth is they wanted to make beautiful, big adult films. They really didn't want to make kids films. They just felt like they had to. So I convinced them to hire me basically, because I think they saw my spunk and tenacity. They wouldn't have to steer me too much. And I was like, I was very blessed. I worked at Sony for 5.5 years on the lot, which was incredibly fun. Got to produce some really great films that I'm really proud of. Learned a lot, and we built a $150 million catalog of children's films, from Bear in the Big Blue House, Dragon Tales. I got to produce some films like Trumpet of the Swan, which is a very famous book by E.B. White, and Reese Witherspoon starred in it. So I got to do some really, really neat things during my Hollywood career.
Did that help land? I'm jumping forward a little bit, but did that help with those connections for investors?
I'd say yes, to a certain degree. I call Sony the MBA I never paid for. I was the youngest vice president out of over 450 people in this division. A lot of times I was, as my sister would say, I was a bull in a china shop. I'd be, I wasn't good at being politically correct. I would just I had an idea. If I wanted to get it done, I'd push. Very entrepreneurial, but it wasn't necessarily always the best instinct of making sure that A was, pleased or what have you. So I think it really helped me understand, because I was really clumsy for a long time at really understanding not what I needed, but what other people needed. And I think that time at Sony, even though it really was sometimes against my instinct or against my impulse, it gave me some refined impulses and refined education of really thinking through the chess pieces 3 steps ahead and making sure that everyone was on board, not just me and my excitement, but making sure that the next person is actually infused with that excitement and not just me guessing that they were because I was feeling it. I think that might have been one of the biggest lessons that I took away from it.
That's awesome. So let's transition to Thrive and real estate, because was the real estate in the blood in that moment, talking to your pregnant wife on screaming on the highway going to San Diego, or was it after the move to Austin that occurred?
No, actually, I left Sony. A long story, some politics. It just wasn't, I knew I wasn't going to go anywhere very far at Sony. And I left, produced my own film, which called Where the Red Fern Grows, which is a pretty famous, Disney released it, and it was pretty cool if you ever want to see it, with Dave Matthews. And here's the ironic part, Reed. I had to get a financer. So I got Dave Matthews, Alison Krauss. I got Disney to release it. It's a very famous book. It's considered 100 of the most important books in American literature of all time for children. And so it was pretty exciting. But here's the irony. When I had to find money to put this together, I found a guy in real estate in Texas who wound up financing it. I knew nothing about real estate or Texas at the time. And the guy turned out to actually totally screw me. As soon as he met Dave Matthews and funded it and got to be famous, he just tore me apart. And he really abused me. I had to get a lawyer and the whole thing. And after 3 years of putting blood, sweat, and tears and putting a film together on my own, the beautiful thing is I'm really proud of the film. The bad news is the guy basically said to me, "I'm super rich. You're not." I was 30. He's like, "I'm just going to crush you. I know we have a contract, but I don't care. I'm just going to lawyer you to death unless you accept my terms." And it was a really, really hard, it really took the air out of me, because can you imagine working that hard for 3 years with no salary because I loved this film? I was smart though. I was savvy from Sony. So my contract was solid. It wasn't like I had a bad contract. This guy literally just was arrogant enough and immoral enough to just say, "I'm just not going to pay you what I told you I would." It was the bottom line. And by the time you get lawyers involved and you collect, I collected a third of what I was deserved, but it was a lesson. But I did decide after that, I really was passionate about and dreamt of financial freedom. And that whole experience really exhausted me. So while I'm really, really proud of my time of producing great things, I decided at that point, I'm not going to do intellectual property anymore. I'm going to produce real property. because I feel like I could have more control. And intellectual property, I got to get a movie studio to say yes. So many things have to go right that are out of my control, that as sexy as it is, I just found I had so little control versus with real estate, I felt like there's still a lot of things have to go right, but I felt like I have a lot more control of my outcome. And that was all logical. So when I transferred from creative, filmmaking to real estate, there was a real adjustment period for me psychologically. I would tell you, I felt depressed. I felt like I'd given up a dream. Real estate finance, which is really what Thrive is a real estate finance company doing syndication. I thought maybe I lost my way. I thought maybe I sold out. And it was a really, really hard couple of years because I knew that was logically correct, but I didn't know if I could ever find the joy in real estate the way I found the joy at Sony of actually, writing and working with writers and producers and all that. And it was a very, very hard transition, to be quite frank.
I can relate somewhat. I'm not artistic. My mother was an artist, and the joke in the family is I don't have an artistic bone in my body. But I've found creating this podcast and creating books and creating a business, there is a creativity to it, right? There is a path blazing element that I assume from someone who is creative may be able to scratch a little bit of that side of you. Did you ever experience that at all as in creating Thrive?
It took me a couple of years of just getting out of survival mode. Because I got screwed out of that big contract, I spent my life savings on that film. So I was really out of money. I joke and say I had my Tony Robbins poster up in my 20s and I'd be a millionaire at 30. And at 30 years old, I think I had $4,000 in my bank account and a shitty car. And that was about it. So I didn't quite hit my Tony Robbins goal. And so I think for a long time, I just don't feel like I had the luxury to even think about, can this be creative? It really was, get food for the family and having my children, diapers for the kids and food for the family, which didn't give me the luxury to think about anything beyond that. And then as the company started getting traction and success is really when I got to think of really starting to really, dial back and think about how I can infuse creative elements and really make Thrive, which it is today, very much a creative part of my soul, which I couldn't tell you it was when I started and had moved to Austin, which was really a new beginning, leaving LA, leaving Hollywood, and going for a new beginning and a house I could afford.
Walk us through what Thrive has been able to do and when did you start Thrive and what were the early days like versus what it is today for the listeners?
So, I moved to Austin 19 years ago and I left all my entertainment days behind me. My dad mentored me for about a year and a half in Los Angeles, which was, again, my dad came through. He was basically a retiring syndicator, small. He had about $2 or $3 million of investor money left, but it was great. He taught me a lot of just the basic principles that gave me enough knowledge that I could actually go off on my own and start a company. So when I moved to Austin, I probably had, with him, I probably had $2 or $3 million worth of investors. I was working out of my home and built the company really from scratch. And, I have to say, I do take some credit. Austin was not an accident. I did some research and where I thought would be a place I'd want to live that would really have a great fertile playground for me for the next 20 to 25 years. And I did pick Austin. I could see, I don't know if I could have even seen as much success as Austin's had, but I certainly felt that Austin was really poised to grow. So it met the values of a place that I could see raising my kids, as well as being a really good market for me. And then really, the story is very organic. It was one investor at a time. I put ads in the newspaper, $50,000 investors, and working my behind off. And finally, I could afford an office. And, I was lucky. And what happened was, do you remember Bernie Madoff, the whole Bernie Madoff thing? So right as I was trying to build momentum, Bernie Madoff gets, indicted for fraud. And that really hurt my business. The economy was starting to go down. It was a recessionary time. Bernie Madoff just got caught and investors were scared, kind of like not that different than where we're at today. When there's down markets, right? People freeze. And this was definitely a frozen market. And people, when people are scared, it's hard to get them to do anything. And so I really had to build a different kind of company. And it was very obvious to me. And maybe this is where creativity came in, that I had to build a company where I could prove fiduciary early. And so what I did is I actually lent more because there wasn't much to buy, kind of like now. The prices were adjusting downwards. So I really focused on the private lending, hard money, private lending side through debt. And it's right when Dropbox came out. So literally, I would tell people, you don't have to trust him. You don't have to trust me. It's all in this third party thing called Dropbox, which seems so revolutionary to have a cloud based file. So it was literally, all you have to trust me with is that I know how to evaluate real estate. But, the title, the appraisal, the deeds, all going to be sitting there, not in my office, that you don't even know what it is. You get to see it. And that really was, I know it sounds so basic at this point, but it really, at the time, I think it really helped me where a lot of people got stuck and frozen. Embracing technology and being one of the first ones out there doing this gave me a leg up to bring in investors in a really hard time, which really set me up for success when the market opened up.
Yep. No, well, I think you're right. It feels like that today. We've had a couple, particularly in the word syndication, and I don't want to get off track. I want to get back to your story. Syndication has a bit of a dirty word. We've seen some advertisements about the 3,200 unit Houston deal that went under, and people are correcting. Commercial real estate's having a bit of a correction right now, and if you're an office, you're probably getting a little hosed, and if you bought in the last 2 years in multi, you probably, with floating rate debt, you might be getting a little bit hosed as well. So we all, I think we all joke, we all have that one ugly stepchild in the portfolio, but it is, I think, capital raising today is a lot more difficult than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So I could probably see very similar lessons that you learnt from back then being applied today. And we mentioned earlier that you're going to start a big fund that we can talk about in a minute. This is the beauty of having a bit of grey hair and history, that you can see history repeating itself. And okay, how do you now pivot today to make sure you can still attract investors? Because my next question is, I assume you still think that, and I'm getting away from the story a little bit, but where we're going to now, you're about to raise a fund, you're about to keep going deploying capital. You probably still think real estate is a very good investment vehicle long term. So, how are you talking to investors today as people are getting a little bit scared?
Definitely. Well, again, I'm almost using a playbook from my original playbook. If you notice, like right now, I'm really focusing. I've always had, for my business, I've always had two major parts of business that thrive. I've had an equity platform where I buy workforce housing, multifamily. We've done about 17,000 apartment units. But I've always had this debt thing, this hard money private lending as well. And what I've always found, and this was an early mentor of mine, not my father, someone else in Los Angeles, who said, JP, it's so good for your business to have more, like they call it like legs on a stool. And equity and debt tend to be sometimes very counter-cyclical, but complementary. When equity's raging and rates are low, people don't really need your money because credit's easy to get, it's cheap. My commodity's not that valuable. Everyone's buying apartments, kind of like what we've been through in the last 10 years. But now in the markets, when the banks freeze up, interest rates get high, there'll be more demand. Well, now equity's soft and slow right now. All of a sudden, more people are calling me about borrowing money because the banks are getting scared and they're freezing. So this really was from my playbook from 18 years ago. And that's why I'm launching this $300 million debt fund. And it's actually called the Thrive Lending Opportunity Fund. Really, again, it's a fund that's really marketed for during more down times and tough credit. And when banks are really going to get hard, trying to help people get through some pretty rough times right now.
Yeah. What do you see? What does your crystal ball see for the future right now in terms of where the Fed is and how we turned a corner? Are we at the we're at the bottom? We're at the top. Where do you think we are at?
Well, you might not like what I'm going to say, but I feel like it's I'm an optimist by nature, so I'm a total optimist. But I do feel like we're just seeing the cracks in the dam, but the dam hasn't broken yet. And when you said we all have one bad cherry, I said I wish it was only one right now. I think we're all seeing the same pressures of expenses on everything, of our property taxes, our insurance, our interest rates, our staff is just sky high. And all of a sudden, expenses are starting to make the numbers not work out. So there's only two things that can happen, right? Either interest rates have to go down or prices have to go down because people still want to make a risk-adjusted return.
Right.
And so I don't think we're ever going back to the days of what we had. And to be honest, it was too low. In my opinion, it was just too low. And so I don't think there's any reason to go back there. I think the Fed waited too long, but that's a whole other story. That's a whole different podcast. I do think that over time, and I think if I was just a guessing man, Biden will put pressure before the election. So if you look at, a year from now, there'll be pressure, but there's another year, but there's already cracks in a weak dam. So I think you are already seeing, and I'm seeing this as a buyer and a seller. I have 2 properties right now under contract for sale. I've had 5 fall out in the last 3 months where the equity wouldn't come through in the end. Like all that fear you can feel. So my thought is it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think we're already seeing 15 to 25% price adjustments in multifamily. I think there's another 10 to 20% to go. I really do. And so I don't like to say that, but that I think that's, so there's going to be, it's probably like you, Reed, there's like, I got to watch and protect my investors to the extent that I can over here, but I also have to be prepared for opportunities because I'm a long-term believer in the fundamentals of commercial real estate, particularly multifamily workforce housing in the United States.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm not from the United States, but multifamily doesn't even exist in Australia. It's a very American thing, and I don't want to get into why it is. I've spoke a lot about it on this show. The whole show's called Investing in the US. Go back and listen to the 300 odd episodes, and I'm sure you'll figure it out. But I will say, we're picking up a deal right today. It's at a 25% discount to the peak of a year ago, right? Yeah. On a price per door pound. Price per
pound doesn't surprise me.
And I picked up 2 deals already like that this year. It's been harder to get investors to say, hey, double down in this market. We still see rent growth. But I do think some of the cracks we're seeing, and I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, I want to get back to the story, is fundamentally the deal's not necessarily a problem. It's a financing problem. You financed incorrectly, right? And then when the Fed raises rates 500%, whatever it is, everyone's going to start to feel it, right? You can't just expect, and we all gorged ourselves on very cheap debt, right?
We do. Well, like theoretically, I heard someone complain. I heard one of our colleagues complain this week. Oh my God, can you believe rates are 7%? I said, well, actually, if you think about it, 7% is not a bad rate. It's a bad rate if you bought property at a 3 cap. Yeah. But really, fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with 7%. It just is based on how high real estate got. So when you say it's a financing problem, it is. But as you know, financing is so interconnected with the value and the price. And so most people, in order to earn cash flow, they're looking at the spread. Hopefully, I'm not going too far between cap rates and interest rates. So you're right. It's a financing problem, but the financing problem absolutely, affects valuations of properties, which we're seeing. And You're obviously taking advantage of it, which I think is brilliant.
No, I think today it's all buying agency loans and buying the rate down as you can, getting cap rates in the high 5s, which I haven't ever bought at a high 5 ever. So across growth markets, that is. I'm not talking about secondary markets, but I'm talking about growth, true growth, Austins, Phoenixes, Carolinas, Floridas of the world.
Those are all 6, 7, 8. In the beginning of the last cycle, I was paying 6, 7, 8. Cap rates. Secondary markets like Shreveport, Louisiana, where I started my career, I was buying 12 caps. So I've seen this before. So the numbers don't really matter, right? At the end of the day, if it's a 12 cap or a 5 cap, it really matters. Investors just want to know what kind of risk-adjusted return is my real estate investment producing. Everything else is kind of like, we get so caught up on the numbers. And at the end of the day, it's just like, what are the alternatives in the marketplace for an investor? And how does real estate compare versus those other investment alternatives?
I will add, just to close a loop on that it's the last 10 years, people have been spoilt with the types of returns they've gotten from commercial real estate, specifically multi, like doubling your money in 3 years. Like I come from a country where if you double your money in 10 years, you're doing just fine, right? That's a low 2-digit type of IRR over a 10-year term. And we've always said at RSN, and other companies I've found, if we can double your money in 5 to 7 years, we're doing just great. And so when you've given, and we've done a couple of deals, and the deals we've done that we've been able to double people's money in 30 months. It's like, and people are like, oh, that looks great. And you're like, yeah, but don't expect that all the time. And now people have got this expectation, and you show them a 14. I'm like, no, it's a true 14 IRR. It's risk adjusted. Like, I don't want 17. You're like, what are we doing here? So
I think this moment in time, all that's washing out in this moment of time.
Correct. I completely agree. And I could have a whole podcast on that because I do want to talk about that. But I want to get back to what you've built with Thrive, because I think your story around, which I want to now pivot into, is the conscious capitalism, right? Talk to me about how that came about, because you're a creative guy, you've come into this world, you're raising money. You said you had in the beginning of raising syndication, and it was very bootstrapping it in the beginning. How did this self-awareness come around to say, I want to make money for investors, but I also want to try and do some good in the world, and maybe give a bit of a background to that?
Yeah, well, it didn't really necessarily come from my childhood, because I did not come from a philanthropic family. I think it really was like, I think like human nature, we tend to see what we want to see. And it's not I don't blame people, but I think our industry, if I was to be completely honest, tends to be by nature can be very extractive to residents, where people are favoring their investor return. So we talk about, it's really simple. How do we create a return for investors? We raise rents, or we lower expenses, or do a combination of both. And usually when either you're raising rents or squeezing expenses, the residents are not thriving in either one of those scenarios. And I think that, again, I don't think people are evil. I don't think people are trying to. I just think it becomes like you're almost not aware of what you're doing. And I think it's very easy for residents to become commodities, right? So you could say we're in the rental business and we're commoditizing the residents. I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, how many pieces of traffic came in the door this week? How many times have you heard that from a manager? Well, when you call someone a piece of traffic versus a human being, a resident, you're commoditizing them. And again, it's all through our industry. And so I think for me, it was just kind of a wake-up call when you start to actually look, how many walkthroughs have you done of real estate? You walk through these properties and you see how people are living. And I think, when you're out of your own survival mode and maybe just kind of looking and saying, are we really doing good for the residents? And it's easy to convince yourself that we are. We all kind of tell ourselves, oh yeah, look, we're have a sparkling pool. We painted it beige. Yeah, you painted it beige, but you raised the rent $120. Let's just be honest, whatever honesty looks like. And by the way, I'm no saint. I'm a for-profit guy who also has to create a return for my investor. But I just think I got really, it started mattering to me more. And it started at a TED conference. I went to a local TED conference here in Austin, and some guy was talking about his experience up in the mountains that had nothing to do with real estate and what thriving really truly looks like. And it was that moment I had a little bit of an aha. And I said, what if I could create truly thriving communities? He used the word thrive as he was climbing up a mountain. But it hit me that wow, what if I could really have thriving communities? And what would that look like? What if I tried to be more creative and less extractive to the resident and didn't want to, could I use my creative juices from Sony and actually create that without hurting my investor return? And I came back and I told my partner, we're gonna be Thrive FP, for purpose, for profit, damn it. And he looked at me very stressed and said, God damn it, I don't want to do FP. Yeah, he used the F-bomb. He's like, you mean we're gonna be a nonprofit, if I can use the language. That's pretty much what he said. And I said, no, we're not going to be a nonprofit. It was scary. It's really scary. What if you tell your investors we're actually going to, we're going to do things, we're going to invest in the residents as well. And there was a lot of fear around doing that. So I went very gently, one step at a time. It's not like I had a master plan. I'm like, let's try to plant a garden and see what happens. Let's put up wind chimes for $90. I'll pay the $90. Put up wind chimes in front of every rental property we have and just see how people think about wind chimes. I think it kind of maybe it shows that you're home, just even simple wind chimes, really, really simple stuff. And I think that on my podcast, Rita, a lot of times I talk about sometimes it's just one step at a time. It's just one baby step at a time that leads you to this beautiful path. And I would describe to you that my path with Thrive really was one baby step at a time that has led to a much, much bigger push now that I'm so grateful for, but I couldn't see the journey. I was just simply trying to make sure that as I was starting to make my own money, that I wasn't doing it on the backs of other people. That was really kind of the basic premise behind it.
In this world of raising capital, and it's nearly like the right and the left, and we got a little bit political about this, but did that cause some of your maybe right-leaning investors to be like, oh, conscious capital, what the go pound sand, you bloody you hippie, did that get a blowback, because we are in a space where we raise money for people who want to grow their dollars, and that's not evil, but some people could see that as evil, and thus if you try and go a little bit swing back the other way, oh gosh, now you're now being accused of being XYZ. So did that ever come to conversations?
There was a lot of concern about that. And two things I came to the conclusion. One, a lot of the investors that we attracted being in Austin were not your, suit and tie, belt and suspenders kind of investors to begin with. So I think that was helpful. But when I really thought about it, I said, what if I lose some investors to my partner? What if we lose some people? And I said, you know what? I'm okay with that. I don't really, I prefer not to, but I'm okay with it. We'll make it up. Instead of being scarcity, I thought I'm in abundance. I'm like, I really want the company culture to be a culture that, that we really truly believe in the triple bottom line, that doing good and doing well are synonymous and doesn't have to be one or the other. And so really from the very beginning, if you listen to my podcast and really what I'm about, Reed, at this point in my life is this, I'm really passionate that, money being a force for good, that the triple bottom line is real, and to really encourage people that, purpose-driven, sustainable businesses create outsized returns. In the case of Thrive, my whether it's on the nonprofit side or the for-profit side, I can show you again and again that treating residents well, I have a 30% higher resident retention almost in every market that I'm in versus my competitors. And so as much as that warms my heart, I'm going to beat you by about 30%. I can tell you after doing this for 10 years, I'm going to get a 20 to 30%. I'm going to literally outpace you financially by 20 or 30% because my residents tend to be loyal. I pay less leasing fees to agents because I get more referrals, particularly in Hispanic communities. When they feel like they're treated well, they feel like it's a family. And I know I'm doing well. When I start to see them put out plants or painting their walls, then I know I'm doing well because that means they feel this is home. So I really can make a strong economic case for why this really makes sense. And it was scary, by the way. Just to answer your question, it really scared us for a while. There was a risk involved with it. We might have lost a couple investors at the end of the day. And I don't honestly know if I've really gained a lot of investors through social impact or not. I really don't know. It'd be a good question to ask my investors. I don't know. I wasn't really doing it for them. It's ironic now with all this ESG being, the most popular thing on the planet and everybody wanting to have these social impact funds. All of a sudden, I'm highly in fashion. I look like the perfect fund at the perfect time. But my drive really was internal the whole time until today. Really, it's great, that ESG is fashionable and it's all in tune. But it came from the beginning from a different place.
No, look, I struggle with that myself a little bit as a leader of a company, and I do want to do more and do give back, and you can dress it a certain way, but there may be some people in particularly in the investing world that just look at you as like, as I said before, you're you're bloody socialist or whatever, that's not the point. And I think the point is trying to, as you're saying, doing good by doing well, and it's not. They don't have to be one or the other, right? You can run a business consciously and not have to. That will ultimately have better impacts on your bottom line, and I think you probably have 10 years worth of data to show that. So that's really freaking awesome.
You think about it. I'm going to get a little philosophical on you for like 10 seconds, and then you can rein me in. I think for a lot of businesses, once again, it's kind of like you look at airlines. When you buy a ticket on an airline, you're paying for the cost of the plane, all the employees, the gas, but you know what you're not paying for? What are the pollution costs to the planet? Like what when you put carbon in there, and I hate to sound like I don't want to lean too much, but the point is there's so many businesses where we don't really take in the total cost of what did it cost to make that dollar. And in the case of apartments, it's like, what is the cost if a tenant feels like they're a commodity and they're just a rent for a rectangular box? What's the cost of that in many, many ways? And I think for all businesses, simply as business leaders and business owners, I just feel like we have a responsibility as humans to take a more, you don't have to do it, but I think that holistic approach really creates a much happier planet. So I would say it's a very humanistic view. It may not make you your last bottom dollar, but actually I can tell you for me, I think when I look at my returns versus my competitors, I know I'm outperforming my peers because of this resident retention. So again, I would say it's a really smart business strategy to do the right thing.
I completely agree, and it's little things like, and I don't want to when you be able to put numbers behind it, I think people get more involved. And one of the simple things is, I'm a big coming from a arid country in Australia. The water use here in America is so stupid, particularly living here in LA. Everyone wants green grass, and you live in a desert, for crying out loud. Like, it should be treated as a commodity. So like doing low flow toilets. Yeah, not only helps an aging building, but actually helps the tenants as well because they're paying less, right? And someone be like, "Oh, you bloody green hippie!" You're like, well, look at the numbers, and okay, it makes sense, So
totally.
Well, just quickly before we tie a bow around that, just some. What are you doing? Like you say, resident retention, but wind chimes. I'm not sure you're just doing wind chimes. What else are you doing to retain that resident more effectively?
Well, again, I'm gonna have to split my hat with you. So we launched 3 years ago a nonprofit called Veritas Impact Partners, and so Veritas's main thing was there was 3 of us that co-founded it, and the purpose of Veritas was for the first time, what if programs around financial education, financial literacy, education, and better health outcomes were just baked into rent. So instead of rent just being you pay $1,000 for a rectangular box, it's 800 feet, it has off-white paint, it has agreeable beige, or we all know the colors I can cite to you. But what if programs came with it? We all talk about affordability, but what if affordability wasn't lowering rent? What if it was just helping people out so that base their overall financial impact was less. And that really was that is the impetus of Veritas, is that programs come with rent. And my goal and my legacy hopefully will be that becomes an industry practice, that programs come with rent. So
what sort of programs are you offering?
Yeah, so like around health, for instance, we're the first company, and I'm talking on the nonprofit side now. And by the way, this is open to all apartment owners who wants to hire the nonprofit Veritas. We've actually hired Teladoc. So we are the first group to provide free telemedicine in certain communities where we know they don't have health insurance, or telemedicine is not a health benefit. And we're doing both mental and physical during COVID. Can you imagine all the people undocumented who had sick kids? They didn't know what to do. They'd crowd the ER rooms, or they wouldn't go at all. And we launched this program during COVID. So giving people out of their living room, away from their phone, to talk to a doctor to see if their kid's okay, what should they do, which again is a great benefit to society because you're not clogging up ERs around the country. And you're also taking the fear out of mothers who at 2 a.m. are watching their kids cough and they don't know if their kid's living or dying or what they should do. So we are now on the nonprofit side, we are now in 8,000 homes, which is about 24,000 families that we're serving. Other things that we're doing is around education, tutoring. So we've joined with another nonprofit, and whether you're in third grade math or you're in college, we have tutoring, digital, online, free tutoring, all kids, all languages, all the time. Around finances, we just partnered with a group called Viva, and we are now banking the unbanked. So we are providing checking accounts, financial education, and saving incentives for those who maybe don't even have a bank account. And it's a digital platform, bank account, tips on how to save. In the future, we're hoping to build an endowment that will actually match savings, so that if you go through a year or two and you actually are able to save, and by the way, savings is a really interesting thing. What you learn about saving, even $500, is a lot of people were just never taught how to save. Going back to my story, my dad taught me how to make $250 at 8 years old. And there was so much I had an advantage of having a dad, which is why the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad is such a relevant book. I had a rich dad who taught me financial literacy, but they don't teach it anywhere else. So teaching people financial literacy from the most basic standpoint is really can change people's lives. And we're already having a great success teaching people how to save. And what you learn about savings is it's a self-esteem issue, particularly for women, single women. They don't feel like they have any control. And even saving something as little as $500, what you really find out is there is an insecurity and a fear around money and a feeling of lack of self-worth. And when they save, the words they're saying are not what you would think. It's not like I had X amount of dollars in a bank account. It's like it changes the way they feel about the value of themselves, not just the value of what's in their bank account. And we're going to double down. This is a new program with Viva, again, checking accounts. And if all goes well, like I said, we're going to even have incentives. The next plan is to help people, educate them on a down payment, and even helping them get a down payment, which sounds like a weird thing. Like, why would you want people to move out of your apartments? And you and I know the answer. And the answer is, if somebody really wants to have a down payment, we have a 6 million person supply demand imbalance, where there's 6 million more people who need apartments than supply. So we can think as owners from a place of abundance. We don't have to hold them. And then when you don't hold them, guess what you create? 30% more retention, because they feel empowered and seen by the ownership. And they know it. They may not know my face, but they know why would someone do this for me? It sends a different message.
As a operator myself, I know we struggle with collections and stuff like that. Is Veritas open to partnering with other third-party owners and operators to bring in their system? We should definitely talk about this offline, because I think this is a very big issue coming out of COVID, and the connection of AI right now, and collecting rents and meter lease and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot more things that we're trying to do to help the on-site team do their job better. But if they had other tools to incentivize people to rent, I think that Teledoc is just an awesome one. You could even go to the next level and do televet because of all the freaking dogs that you have, so
totally.
But education and tutoring, I think, are just such a great thing. So I'll definitely chat with you a little bit offline.
Yeah.
To wrap up the show, we're like, give us a sort of snapshot of where you're heading in the next 2 to 5 years. I know you personally, you're without spoiling, stepping not away, but just in a different direction. But what does that look like as Thrive keeps thriving?
Yeah. So, I guess everyone has different things. I definitely don't want to retire, but I love this idea. Chip Conley talks about I'm in my 50s. And so in your 50s, it's like if you've been given, great success, with great success comes great responsibility. And I think, I actually might have another company. I'm actually playing with the idea of another company because I have so much creative energy. But the truth is, I also want to make sure that servant leadership is really like mentorship, servant leadership, communities. I'm really passionate about all communities, whether they're apartment communities or even leadership, like thought, communities like this conversation we're having now. Like, how do we create better leaders? How do we, at the end of the day, when we die, what was our legacy? Not what are we remembered for, but really what was important. So I think a lot of what I'm thinking about right now is in the lines of servant leadership, mentorship, and this idea of what, can I, if given so much, can we, hopefully even on this podcast, if one person gets one idea that helps their business or they think a little differently, I told you, like, for me, it started with a tomato garden. And I realized that tomatoes weren't good, by the way, because kids throw them. But it started with the idea of like, what if I did a wind chime or like one step at a time? And I'm hoping that impact, whether it's one listener on your show or whatever it is, creates these like winds of change. And that really is what empowers me to this point. So I'm going to be going more to a chairmanship role. I'm actually doubling down on my employees right now in terms of training process, so that really the company does continue to thrive. We're looking, my partner is about my same age. And we both kind of looked at each other and said, do you want to play golf or do you want to do something? We're actually looking to double the size of the company of equity under management. We currently have about 250 million under management. And our next goal is 500 million, and really participating in the next round, which we think is going to be, exciting. We really are long-term bullish on real estate. So it's just a different way of looking at it, but I want to continue growing. So I don't think you and I love deals. I just love deals. I love hearing about them. You and I could talk offline for hours and that would be great. So I'm not walking away from real estate. I just want to change my relationship with it, basically.
Yeah, no, I think that's changed the relationship with it. I think that's that is the sort of the summary of the show. I think is a very, very good changing a relationship and seeing that evolve over time and thriving. So thank you for sharing that. At the end of every show, we like to dive into the lightning round of the top 5 investing tips. You ready to get into it?
Let's do it.
Mate, question number 1 is what daily habit do you practice to keep on track towards your goals?
Well, I have been doing more and more. And just this week, I actually bought a cold plunge. So I'm really trying mindfulness that before I get involved in emails or anything, that I spend my first 15 minutes, even if it's just 15 minutes, hopefully it's longer, doing something where I'm tuning my body towards waking up and presence. Yep. And I think it makes me a lot more productive for my day.
100%. I try not use the phone for the first hour. I've got a young 9-month-old, so she's taking up all my mornings. But I understand the what you're trying to get there. Awesome on the cold plunge. Question number 2 is, who's been the most influential person in your career to date?
Interesting. Well, certainly my father has been one of them. I'll always be grateful that he trained me. But I'd have to also say Peter Diamandis and Tony Robbins are people I don't know that really influenced me. When I read Peter Diamandis's book, Bold and Abundance, it really gave me this idea of what we've been talking about on the show about business being a force for good, and really rather than dystopian futures that everyone wants to talk about, these dystopian futures of AI. Well, what if we could vote through what we do, through our money, through our currency? And I think that idea between Tony Robbins and Peter Diamandis really affected how I see the world today.
Awesome. Question number 3 is, what's the most influential tool in your business? And when I say a tool, it could be a notebook like this, which I'm scribbling in, so a physical tool, or it could be a piece of software that you just can't run the business without. What is it?
Well, I can tell you my staff would have a different opinion than me. They would say it's Juniper for relationship management. I think for me these days, I think this computer, and I think this moment of us podcasting together, I think sometimes we take this for granted, but you and I are live right now. Like this would have been like the Jetsons 10 years ago. We have a stable internet connection. And for the first time, and COVID really did this, where everybody knows you can meet on Zoom. We can do transactions around the world. We can do everything on the fly. And so I'm going to argue that this laptop and Zoom is the most important thing, because even with all the AI, and I'm using ChatGPT and I'm going to write pretty letters, the bottom line is, whether it's attracting investors or having that broker call you for the next great deal, it's still that human connection. Am I going to call Reader JP or am I going to call someone else? Who's going to who's going to close? Who is the most pleasant to deal with? Who do I trust? All those human instincts are so important. And that's where I don't think that you can't commoditize. You can make things more efficient, but you're not going to commoditize human interaction because we are feeling beings. And unless singularity or we can create consciousness in robots, which could be another episode, I still think that's going to have a premium and ultimate success for entrepreneurs.
Love that. Feeling beans. I love that. People just didn't catch that one. Question number 4 is, what, in one sentence, what's been the biggest failure in your career? What did you learn from that failure?
Well, I'll give you one of those, to the one that came up to mind. I had someone steal money from me. It was a trusted consultant early in my business. And I actually called him the uncle to my kids. That's how much I trusted him when my kids were young. And I found out he was stealing money. He had access to a bank account and he stole a good amount of money from the bank account. And it took my breath away. Both, it was a financial setback, but also I just didn't think that someone that I could trusted so much in my family would ever steal money from me. And then on top of it, because he was kind of a lawyer, he sued me because he knew I was going to indict him. And so he sued me he made up this whole story that I owed him back bills, or he had made up invoices and said he was actually just collecting what he needed to collect. First, he cried and told me he was sorry. But after that, he went into this whole story. And we met last time we met face to face. He was like trying to bully me, like, you're going to even pay me more. Like he was extorting me. Like I think he felt he wanted a piece of my success. And at the time, I threatened to sue him. And it turned out that it turned into a huge legal battle that took 2 years. And I don't remember how much money, but it was quite a bit of money. And I wonder, looking back on that, if it would have been better not to threaten to sue him, if I just wasn't so attached, if I just would have let him take the money and get rid of him out of my life and move on, it probably would have saved 2 years of hell and dispositions. We all know, if you've ever been in a lawsuit, how energetically draining they are. So I think the lesson is, be careful to stay out of lawsuits. And sometimes I've lost many cases where I knew I was right now, and I'm willing to settle now because I just see the toll it takes, both economically and psychologically. And what's the value of your time?
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. It's obviously a lesson we all hope we never have to go through, but thank you for giving that advice. Last question is, where can people reach you to continue the conversation that will be in your sphere? Where do they go?
Sure. If you want to know more about our company, thrivefp.com. It's THRIVEFP.com. On the side of my podcast, if you want to hear more about this conscious capitalism, I have a podcast called Investing on Purpose. And Investing on Purpose is on all the channels, Spotify, YouTube, and what have you. And again, it's a show very much like what we're talking about, creating sustainable businesses, where I interview CEOs who are creating these outsized returns and the creative ideas they're applying. Very much like you read it, how CEOs are really using their creativity to create better outcomes.
That's awesome. Well, mate, I want to thank you so much for jumping on the show today. We've been recording for nearly 50 minutes. I could continue talking to you, your wealth of knowledge. Just some of the things that I took away from today's show. I think the last statement you made, changing your relationship with real estate, and I think it sums up every entrepreneur's journey in a sense that you do it to create the financial freedom, right? But then you start to realize, they're not just a piece of traffic. They're a human being, and creating these other things around being conscious of how you create money or abundance in your life through money by changing the mindset of how you view someone else, right? As the widget, so to speak. They're not a widget, they're a human. And we rent to low socioeconomic people. Well, they may need a teledoctor, or they may need some extra tutoring, or they may need to be taught how to save better. And these little pieces cost you relatively nothing, but can be such impactful on the greater community, which can also impact your returns for your investors. So that's been you mentioned before, what you take away from the show. I've taken a lot away from this show. I've done over 500 bloody episodes on this show. And that's been as an operator, from an operator to another operator, thank you for sharing. So
there's one more big piece that you and I haven't talked about at the end of the day too, and we'll save it for, a future show. But as humans, we tend to be happier when we're doing the right thing. Like how many people have you met that are, there's plenty of people who are wealthier than me that drive jets and yachts. And I feel like I'm probably doing better than most of them because I'm at peace with myself. And I know that's a whole other, but I think that's the selfish benefit. That's the selfish return you get of your own IRR, your entrepreneurial IRR
I love that.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurial IRR. I love that. Well, mate, thank you again.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll catch up very soon.
Thanks, Ray. Appreciate it.
Well, there you have another cracking episode, jam-packed with some incredible advice from JP. Please remember to go over to www.thrivefp.com to check him out, or Investing in Purpose, I should say. It's across all the platforms, Spotify. Just Google it. JP is a wealth of knowledge. If you are in Austin, don't go knocking on his door, but I'm sure he'd be willing to meet up for a coffee if you are listening into this show. I want to thank you all again for taking some time out of your day to tune in to continue to grow your financial IQ, because that's what we're all about on this show. If you like this show, the easiest way to give back is to give it a 5-star review on iTunes. We're going to do it all again next week. So remember, be bold, be brave, and go give life a crack.